George H.W. Bush's presidency, it only lasted 4 years. But in that incredibly short time, the world as we knew it completely changed. This was the man in the Oval Office when the Berlin Wall came crashing down and the Soviet Union just dissolved. So how on earth does a president who oversees the end of the Cold War and hits one of the highest approval ratings in history end up losing his re-election? Well, let's get into it.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Bush wasn't just some politician who became president. He was the end result of a career that put him in almost every major seat of American power before he even aimed for the top job. You could almost say his entire life was one long training exercise for the unbelievable historical moments he was about to face.
So to really get a grip on how he handled the presidency, you first have to understand that journey. People often talk about Bush's career before the White House as one of the most impressive, most packed resumes in American history. It was a true, lifelong apprenticeship in how to run a country.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It really shows the incredible range of his experience. He starts as a decorated World War II pilot back in 1942, then becomes an oil guy in Texas, then it's off to Congress, the UN, and get this, even running the CIA. And that's all before he spends 8 years as vice president. This was not your typical politician's path. This was a masterclass in diplomacy, intelligence, and leadership.
So this is the world he steps into in 1989. For years, the main strategy had been this thing called détente, basically a careful easing of tensions. The Cold War was kind of thawing, but it was far from over. And nobody, not even the CIA, had any idea just how fast the whole thing was about to fall apart. One wrong move could have caused a massive backlash in Moscow or just chaos all over Europe. Bush's job was to somehow manage this incredibly delicate process without letting it all blow up.
And manage it he did. I mean, his presidency would really be defined by his steady, cautious, and, as we're about to see, unbelievably effective handling of one of the biggest geopolitical shifts in modern history. Just look at this cascade of events, all happening in just a couple of years. Communist governments are toppling, Germany reunifies, and then, by 1991, the Soviet Union itself is just gone. The world order that had defined everything since 1945 basically evaporated. But the key here was Bush's strategy. He famously refused to go to the Berlin Wall and give some triumphant "We won" speech. No, his administration's goal was stability. They quietly worked to support German reunification and ensure a soft landing for a collapsing nuclear superpower.
Okay, so with the Soviet Union no longer in the picture as a balancing power, America's new role as the world's only superpower was immediately put to the test. And that test came when Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded its tiny, oil-rich neighbor, Kuwait.
And this is where all those decades of experience really, truly paid off. He didn't just go it alone. Instead, he painstakingly built a massive international coalition, got the UN's blessing, and then executed a swift, decisive military campaign. It was an absolute masterstroke of diplomacy and strategy, and it was the first real-world test of what he called the New World Order, this idea that international law, backed by a global coalition, would stand up to aggression.
And the result of that incredible victory? This number. 89%. In March of 1991, George H.W. Bush had one of the highest presidential approval ratings ever recorded. At that moment, his re-election didn't just feel likely, it felt totally inevitable.
But as he was about to learn the hard way, winning overseas doesn't always guarantee you'll win at home. While Bush was mastering the world stage, an economic storm was brewing back in America, and he really struggled with what he once famously called the vision thing when it came to domestic policy. This was the promise, that one single line from his 1988 campaign that everybody remembers. It was supposed to be an ironclad pledge to his conservative supporters and, really, to all Americans. And then this was the reality. He was facing these massive deficits left over from the Reagan years, and Bush made a pragmatic choice. He cut a deal with Democrats on a budget that, yes, included tax increases, all to get the country's finances back on track. Now, a lot of economists will tell you it was the responsible move for the country, but politically, it was absolutely devastating. He had broken his biggest promise, and it completely shattered his credibility with his own base.
And it wasn't just the broken tax pledge. The economy was sliding into a recession. That peace dividend everyone expected after the Cold War just hadn't shown up yet. And as you can see here, unemployment was rising sharply. All of a sudden, voters stopped caring about the sands of Kuwait and started worrying about their own wallets. A news story started to form that the president was a foreign policy genius who was just plain out of touch with the struggles of regular Americans.
But it's really important to remember that his domestic record wasn't all bad. In fact, it had some huge wins. He signed the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, a massive piece of civil rights legislation, and he strengthened the Clean Air Act. These were major bipartisan achievements, but they just got drowned out by the noise of the recession and that tax controversy.
So how does a president with an 89% approval rating lose re-election just a year and a half later? Well, it all boils down to this fundamental disconnect. He was seen as a master of the global stage, but more and more people saw him as out of touch with what was going on right here at home. It was like he had two presidencies, one for foreign affairs and a completely different one for domestic issues. And this slide just lays that contradiction out perfectly. On the left, you've got the global statesman, ending the Cold War, reunifying Germany, winning the Gulf War. But on the right, you see the reality at home, a painful recession and a broken promise that fueled this out-of-touch image, a weakness that his opponents, well, they skillfully exploited.
And here are the final results. Bill Clinton's campaign just hammered away on the economy with that famous line, "It's the economy, stupid." Plus, you had this third-party candidate, Ross Perot, who pulled in a massive 19% of the popular vote. He split the electorate and helped lead to a pretty decisive defeat for the sitting president.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. George H.W. Bush came from a political world that valued compromise and finding consensus. He broke his biggest campaign promise because he thought it was the right thing to do for the country's finances. In today's hyper-partisan world, a decision like that feels, well, almost unthinkable. It makes you wonder, was his greatest strength, his pragmatism, also the very thing that led to his political downfall? And could a leader like him even get elected today?